Hey, all, Leanna here. This one ended up being a two-parter because it was so long we wanted to break it up. It was a big topic. So when it just stops at the end this week, part 2 will be up next week. Thanks and enjoy. It's another two women talking with me, Leanna, and Song Erickson. It is Tomboy and Girly Girl with two women talking, and we are talking this episode about strength. What it is, how it's depicted in men and women in fiction, emphasis on fiction and culture. The last episode, some guy claimed we were trashing Kurt Cobain, and Song and I were like, what? What? So we want to be clear here, all listeners. We're examining culture. When we're offering a personal opinion, we'll say so, but overall, this is observations of depictions and reactions. We are not here to just throw shade at dead musicians. I think it was funny of all the comments, Song. That one, we both independently went, what?
I mean, I kind of got it. Like, I think it was specifically me because I don't like Kurt Cobain. I don't like Nirvana. It's not my thing. I don't like grunge.
Yeah, but it's just like no shade on the person. You just don't like the music.
Yeah. So
I've always found that, to get into the topic, I've always found that bizarre, as somebody who's been on television and is an influencer, whatever that means, the weird conflating with what a character stands for with some sort of personal dislike. And I've had this ongoing discussion with somebody else about the show Supernatural and people's take on the two brothers in that. And they have Sam, who's more traditionally likable and outgoing, but he is that way because his brother Dean is more of a guardian protector figure. And so he says less. Yes, he can come off as a bit of a jerk, but that's because he's carrying so much on his shoulders. And I'm just so thrown by people's reactions to characters that, unless it's that sort of outward projection, people don't see the strength. People don't see the nobility. So maybe we should start there. What's your take on strength and how it's depicted in male characters versus female characters?
Horribly in both senses.
Yeah.
Because, the key reason I wanted to talk about this subject is so often, and I see it in male and female characters, but admittedly, in mainstream, I see it more in female characters. I'll get to romance novels in a minute because that's one of my pet points. But we see it where, in order, especially, like I said, in mainstream female characters, it's, oh, she's a strong character. And she's really, what she is a jerk. Like, it's supposed to be that she doesn't take any shit, but more often than not, that manifests as her giving people shit for no real reason.
Right.
She's snarky, she's mean, and somehow it seems we've come to conflate the idea of being polite with being a pushover. And even worse, I think it's become very feminized. Like, you look back even at, like, okay, let's go with Jane Austen, because that's something I'm very familiar with and I can speak confidently. You look at Jane Austen, everyone had a system of rules that they were supposed to follow.
That's right. That's the whole point.
It wasn't just that the women were raised to be quiet and polite. The men were also raised with a level of that.
That's right.
And part of it does come back to British society in particular, where it's, you don't show your feelings. You're very reserved.
Do we have to God Save the King right now because we've had the changeover? I mean, that's relevant right now, right? Because even people don't understand that. Austen is as much about what's not said as what is said, right? Yeah.
There was in 2007, BBC did a mini series of Sense and Sensibility, which I highly recommend. It's very good. It's like 4 episodes, I think. But it literally opens with Willoughby seducing Eliza. Like it's this very artfully shot montage kind of opening, but you see him like taking off her dress. And again, it's very artful. So it's like you're just seeing the shoulder and seeing from behind in silhouette kind of. And she's like, oh, I was told not to do this. And he's like, oh, well, your governess still thinks you're a child. And in the creators, in the special features, the creators talked about how most people don't realize that the story of Sense and Sensibility really is kicked off both by the sisters being kicked out by their brother, but also with the seduction of a schoolgirl. And it's like, you never really think about that because it's one of those things that's never really said. Just like one of the characters, it's never actually said that she's pregnant. It's just, oh, she's going for her lying in and suddenly there's a baby.
Right.
Because that's something you didn't talk about.
Right.
And Austen also isn't going to straight up say, like she did say that Eliza had Willoughby's child, but you still don't fully comprehend what's happening. And that's one thing I really enjoyed about that miniseries was they still didn't straight up say things, but they framed things in a way that gave you a kind of new understanding of what was happening and just how scandalous the whole story was. Which that's the thing. People are like, Austen, oh, especially compared to the Bronte sisters, she's so repoised and everything is so clean. No, there is so much going on in all of those stories.
It's always strange to me how people miss that stuff. And I think, that's interesting that you talk about the update and sort of the, because of course the Colin Firth miniseries that my mother and sister would be crazy with is, I think, sort of still the standard. And so everything that's made since has to be something that can stand alongside the Colin Firth miniseries.
I never got the Colin Firth miniseries.
I don't either. Even as a teenager, I was like, this is not romantic. This is social commentary on how people were trapped in boxes.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, I do find Pride and Prejudice in a way. I hesitate to call her stuff romance because it gets written off as it's so much. And I've even gotten into arguments with
I don't think it's romance, it's satire.
Yeah, I'm like, these aren't romance novels. And they're like, yes, they are. The main plot is romance. And I'm like, not really.
And like the main plot is women navigating a really, really restrictive society.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I enjoy Elizabeth and Darcy. I think it is a great commentary on different personalities and of course Pride and Prejudice. Right. I have a friend who a few years ago, he'd been taking my advice on like movies to watch, and when he realized I had good taste, one day he messages me and says, hey, you like Jane Austen? I picked up Pride and Prejudice from the bookstore just to see what it's about. He's now read all her stuff and he's like, this is amazing. This isn't romance. This is just not great.
It's not. And I actually fear for society that people think that Austen is romance.
Yeah.
And that, see, to me, when I think I started with did she write Emma?
Yes.
Okay. I think
which is my favorite of her work.
Oh, interesting, because that's the one I started with. And I'm like, okay, this is somebody struggling against confines. I find Austenian heroines, especially when Emma Thompson directs, I find them very strong, right? I guess stalwart is the fancier word for it. And to me, that's sort of, we can only push so far. We need to make the best of what we can. And I think the challenge with modern adaptations of Austen is people cannot relate to the idea of marriage and marrying well being survival for women back then.
See, well, I said Emma is my favorite. The thing is, recently I've noticed a shift as I've gotten a bit older, because I like Emma because I see a lot of myself in her.
I can see that. Okay, yeah.
But as I've gotten older recently, I realized I think my favorite is actually becoming Persuasion.
All right.
Which is why Netflix really did me dirty.
I can't do the Netflix period stuff. I can't. I tried with Bridgerton. I tried with Persuasion. I can't.
I honestly, I think I could handle Bridgerton better than I could Persuasion.
Oh, you got to try Bridgerton because I struggled. I said that the fabrics are cheap and the underwear is wrong.
Oh
God. I
don't get me started on the corsets. I'm just gonna say this. Why are they wearing corsets
in Regency gowns?
So one, for those who don't know, Regency gowns are characterized by the empire waistline, which means it's tight in the bust, and then it goes straight down from straight under the bust. There is no waist definition.
Yeah, two, unless you've got a broken spine, a corset is useless.
Yeah. And two, at that time, they didn't wear corsets. They wore stays.
That's right.
Which even when they made the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, all the women, even Keira Knightley, who has talked about not liking corsets because she's been put in very bad ones, they pretty much all the girls from that movie said the stays they wore, which were historically accurate, were some of the most comfortable items they'd ever worn.
I would like Regency stays to come back because of the structure. And a lot of guys listening to this right now are like, what are they on about? But okay, let me explain. We're going to talk about boobs, guys. Hang on, man.
Oh, I don't think anyone will complain.
Well, no, because I prefaced it boobs. Okay, now I have the audience back, right? But, when you are, shall we say, well endowed, the problem with your standard, Victoria's Secret's bra is it collapses under the weight of its own brilliance, shall we say, unless there is that inch or two underneath the cup that actually keeps it held up and doesn't just sort of roll. And so Regency stays are perfect for that. It's got the soft boning, and then sort of that, especially when they do the proper 3-seam cups, it's the absolute best thing you can get in terms of support and comfort. And I do not know why they have not made a comeback for that reason. They just are. It's unfortunate that the most comfortable garment for women is from a period in fashion that, I don't know about you, the Regency gowns make me look awful.
I cannot wear Empire.
Yeah.
It just makes me, it's kind of funny. My best friend's sister watches Bridgerton. And at one point he said he walked through the room, glanced at the TV, and he's like, one of the characters looks like you. And I'm like, it's the heavyset girl, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. That's based on the way it goes. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but
no. And he was like, yes, but that wasn't it. She just looks like you, but you have a better fitting corset, which is nice of him to say, considering he's never seen my corset. He's just had to listen to me over the years.
But I mean that it's weird, the symbol of the corset, right? And it becoming this sign of sort of female bondage, and it so isn't. No one who's worn a proper one thinks that. I mean, yes, it was ridiculous that governors' daughters in the Caribbean were still wearing those things because of the weather, but otherwise, a properly fitting corset isn't uncomfortable. You can move in them. You can't overeat in them, but that's not a bad thing.
No.
But yeah, that's sort of.
And I don't know, I can still pack away food in a corset.
I just have to say, I can't eat too much because most of my corsets are wasp waist, just because my hip to waist ratio is so bizarre to begin with.
Yeah.
That once that goes in, it really goes in. And I people don't realize part of the reason I wore corsets wasn't because it was necessarily pretty. It was freakish. When I did the reduction, I'm like, yeah, I felt scary right?
Yeah.
It was in your face, and I didn't get groped when I had a terrifying hip to waist ratio.
Well, look at Vampira.
Yeah,
It and that
exactly.
original design, even, I like tight lacing.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where even I'm like, okay, that's a bit much. And Vampira is one example of that.
Yeah, well,
But
that's training down to like a 19 to 14-inch waist, right? I mean,
yeah,
you start displacing internal organs at that point.
yeah.
Yeah. I
So
mean, I was down to, thanks to COVID, I haven't done it in a while, but I was down to 22 at one point. And so, I mean, my hip measurement is, depending on the day, between a 40 and a 42. That's a lot of hip to waist ratio, right?
yeah,
That is not in the bounds of this is an attractive woman. That's freak show.
yeah. I'm at the point where the corset I have does not properly fit my waist to my hips, so I need to get a new one
Yeah, it happens. They
that fits
do
better.
they do sort of misshape. They wear out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean that we're on topic, guys, because I'm talking about the fact that, I wore corsets to project don't fuck with me, not to be inviting. The biggest groping problems I ever had in a cosplay, hands down, was the Brandy cosplay from Frank Cho's Liberty Meadows, which is jean shorts, a white cotton t-shirt, and Keds. I had
That's
more problems. Yeah, I had more problems in that costume because she's girl next door. She's
yeah,
girl next door. Guys think they can take liberties.
yeah. That's bizarre to me because I would think it would be the slave Leia costume.
I had guys would pull the damn
Which,
chain.
yeah, I know
Yeah,
you've talked about the chain.
no,
One thing,
Leia, because we know what she does to Jabba, right? So guys
yes.
who understand the movie know don't mess. They know that's like bright colors in nature. This is dangerous and will fuck you up, right?
So I want to say this, coming back to the topic of strength
Mm-hmm.
and the thing about the corset, and I've heard other women say, just so people know, I wear mine every day.
Mm-hmm.
I wear mine to work. So this isn't something I do I'm not wearing it now because I'm at home. But if I go out, I wear it pretty much. And part of it is it hugs your body. And there's something very secure
Mm-hmm.
about that. And
Your
also the
back
fact
doesn't
knowing
ache at the end of the day.
your back doesn't ache at the end
Yeah.
of the day.
Yeah.
And also there is metal in that corset.
Yeah.
And that's part of what helps hold you up and
That's right.
hold you in. Someone I heard it described once that the thing about wearing a corset, and also a lot of the fashion women wore back then, was it wasn't just that you had the corset to lace in your waist. You also had padding
Mm-hmm.
for your chest to
That's right.
fill it out. You had padding to fill out your hips. So if your body wasn't the physical ideal or the
Yeah.
beauty standard of the time, you could create that
Yeah.
through what you wore. You can't do that in jeans and a t-shirt. But
Well,
because of
you
that,
can buy those butt pad underwear, but those things are weird, man.
yeah, and they don't have the same result.
No.
And so I get the feeling that obviously body issues have always been an issue, but I think there was a difference where you could create the figure you wanted and that was socially the beauty standard of the day. You didn't actually have to be that. No one had to know what your shape actually was under your clothes. And that creates a level of confidence.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we've lost a lot of. I remember reading a book on the history of wedding dresses once. And
Mm-hmm.
as it transitioned to the modern era, more like 80s and 90s, and specifically the 2000s, I remember this one line where it said, now women's waists were sculpted by their abdominal muscles or their corset muscles rather than actual corset.
That was absolutely the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's when girdles and slips went bye-bye. And I miss slips.
And I was wearing a skirt recently and I'm like, I need a slip to go under this. I missed my petticoats.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me realize we suddenly have all this pressure to go to the gym, to diet, to work out, to try and manipulate our bodies into this rather than just manipulating our clothes. And we wonder why women suddenly feel depowered in a way. Even as the feminist movement has come up and we've had more rights, we see women who are absolutely struggle. And, before we started recording, we were coming to the subject of She-Hulk.
Yeah.
And how Jen projects this strength, and she projects this very modern version of strength in women that I see people try to strive for. But we also see the consequences of that, in that no one can maintain that. And
that's what I like about the show is it's not actually strength, it's sort of obnoxious aggression.
Yes, and that was almost exactly what I was trying to describe earlier, with this idea of women become jerks in a way to project strength, and not so much real women, but I see it a lot in fiction. And that was my problem with Captain Marvel, was
you couldn't find two characters that are more different, huh? Captain Marvel and Jen Walters?
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it does come back to the culture they were, I'm going to say, raised in for Captain Marvel, just because she had amnesia. So the world of the Kree, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so the world of the Kree was all she'd known. So she was socialized into that.
But that movie was also set in the 90s with none of the damn nuance about why women were the way they were in the 90s. They stripped all the context out of what was going on there other than the soundtrack, and that drove me crazy. Yeah. Whereas Jen is modern, and I mean, I think the most recent episode really drilled down on the fact that she's actually not good at the more feminine sphere. She's not even terribly successful as a lawyer. She puts on this front, but has she won a case
yet? She got the Abomination parole.
Right, well, kind of. Wong got the Abomination parole. Spoilers. But I mean, that went to shit. And then they, she basically had to, it was actually believable that she got the resolution to the most recent case out of court. It wasn't by arguing in court. It was basically strong-arming the dude out, in a private settlement, which I thought was more realistic than most courtroom dramas. It's like a Harvey Specter move, right? Go ahead.
I remember when the phrase hot mess first started to become a thing.
Yeah.
Like, I remember seeing it in headlines. I think it was Anna Kendrick was on a magazine cover, and she was like, oh, she's a hot mess and she's proud of it. And I'm like, there's nothing to be proud of, because you can't sustain that.
I hate the whole hot mess thing. See, this is personal opinion. I know it's a thing, and I'm glad people can talk about it, but it just seems like wallowing as opposed to getting your shit together.
And I see that a lot in society, where people say, oh, I have this issue or I have that issue, so this justifies what I do. It doesn't justify what you do. Mm-hmm. And it is still your responsibility to move beyond that.
Right. Right. And I mean, that, again, to me, that's real strength. And that's where, I mean, I'm gonna, you knew Captain America was coming in this guy, guys, not in the way they talk about it in She-Hulk. In he will arrive. But that first movie, I mean, I think we've talked before about our shared love of the first Thor movie, and then the first Captain America movie, and how I think personally they are the strongest, like definitively strongest in terms of character MCU heroes.
Well, it was before Whedon came in and reduced everyone to one-liners.
That's why I hated the Avengers films, is all of a sudden the things that made me like Thor at first, and the things that made me like Steve Rogers, in the case of Steve Rogers, were diluted, but at least he was still essentially the same dude. Thor was just all of a sudden quippy, bro lines.
You
And
humans are so petty and tiny. Like, what?
and he's supposed to be humble at that point, right? And it's funny because they weren't even consistent in his smarmy smarm look down his nose, right? No. Because when this is the line, I'm like, fuck you, Joss Whedon, for the first time in the movie, when they're talking about, no, this might have been the third fuck you in that movie for me, but when they're all sitting around talking about Loki, who I maintain is the greatest hero in the Marvel Cinematic Universe now, because he gave the entire fucking multiverse free will. Fight me. Talk more on that. But when Thor momentarily defends him against character assassination by saying he's a son of Asgard, and Black Widow says something like he killed, I don't remember, 2 million
83 people in a day.
Yeah, he killed a bunch of people. Thor says,
well, he's adopted.
That's not the line, because what do Asgardians do? They fucking kill. Every Norse god is a god of war. Every Norse goddess is a god of fertility. They kill shit and they fuck. That's what the Norse gods do. And he was adopted. The Norse didn't distinguish that. Odin was having kids in the myth with all the other people, and I'm just like, that is not the line. And to me, I liked temporarily that Thor was like, hey, yeah, he's done some bad shit. He's still my brother. Watch it. Right. It was like a moment of, okay, this is interesting. This is the worthiness that we saw him gain. And then he's eating fucking shawarma.
And so I want to talk about Thor, because okay, I might have to be a bit roundabout. Okay, here's where we're going to start. So obviously in these discussions, we've talked about the fact I am the woman that the Thor shirtless scenes are aimed at.
Yep.
I was 19 when I saw the first Thor movie. When he walked across the screen shirtless, my friend had to lean over and say, "Song, breathe."
Really?
Because I'd forgotten. Yeah, I'd never seen a man like that.
I felt so, what is wrong with me in that moment? Because every woman in the theater and a few of the guys were like, woo! And I'm like, pants too low, pull up, shouldn't be looking. It was like, to me, it was like walking in on your buddy naked, right? Like that roommate situation of, dude, lock the door. It was a totally different thing. And I saw it with my mother and my sister. And when your mom's going, when your mom's George Takeiing over that, like, oh my.
Oh
like,
my.
oh my God, fucking help. Maybe that's why I like Loki, because of that moment of, oh, fuck that guy, But yeah, it's interesting that was sort of, oh wow, bodies like that exist, because to me it was very much Fabio and the old romance covers.
Well, the only like built males I'd ever seen were stuff like bodybuilders, because my sister's dad used to have like bodybuilder magazines lying around, and I'm like, that is obscene. That's gross. I don't like that. And so I'd never seen someone like Thor in that moment.
Oh, the leaner waist.
The leaner waist.
Okay.
And he wasn't oiled.
Okay, yes, the oil. Yeah.
That's probably part of it. So, and now I think it did also help that I'd seen his personality up until that point.
Yes, yeah, so for
sure. I love the barbarian prince trope. Can I get away with talking about Eret for a second? Okay, I'm gonna do this just because I can. So in How to Train Your Dragon 2, there is a character that's introduced named Eret, son of Eret. And anyone who understands Norse naming traditions is now looking at my pen name and putting a few things together. So Eret's arc in the second movie is he is a dragon trapper working for the villain who has also experienced serious trauma related to the villain. But over time, he's persuaded more towards Hiccup's way of thinking, specifically because his life is saved by a dragon who has decided he is her new toy.
Yes.
But he comes in, he's arrogant, he's swaggering, and over the course of the story, he learns a level of humility. But he's still who he is at the end. So he's still got a bit of sword, and I love him. I love him so much. And I'm similar with Thor, where Thor comes in, he's arrogant, he's swaggering, but his story is that he does learn humility.
Right.
But the thing is, everyone associates, oh, he's big and dumb and rude. He's never rude in that entire movie.
No.
Now, the one exception is he overthrows a banquet table, which honestly, considering everything, is understandable.
But that was supposed to be a compliment.
Yes.
You know, when he smashes the mugs and everything,
so,
like
yeah,
that was a tip for good service.
Well, before that, there's a point he overthrows a banquet table on Asgard before they go to Jotunheim.
Right.
And, you know, oh God, I can't remember his name. The one friend is like, oh, what a waste of perfectly good food. But again, his whole day has just been ruined. And the worst he did was overthrow a banquet table and then go and declare a war. But I mean, that's part of the
civilized
story.
For the Norse gods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, he brings the mug, and like you said, it's considered polite. Now, it may be a bit of warrior frat boy behavior, but he also comes from a place where, like, his cups are made of bone and metal. So it's not supposed to break. It's like, this is so good, give me another. And but his behavior towards Jane, his behavior towards Eric and Darcy, perfectly polite.
Yep.
He, considering what he's dealing with, he's actually doing very good. And
he rapidly figures out that he's a fish out of water and he can't pull that shit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we see with Jane, and that's why the Thor and Jane romance was at its best in that first movie.
Yeah.
Because there's a sincerity to it. And it's these two people who are very different, but who find ways to connect. That was one thing that frustrated me watching She-Hulk last night with the dating scenes. And even with the Doctor, who I knew from the spoiler alert, who I knew from the first second was too good to be true. Especially like,
so much. Yeah.
I've been on so many days.
That guy.
I'm tired of talking about myself. Yeah. I'm like, no, I don't like you. It's going too well. And it's just, oh, I'm so tired of talking about myself. Tell me about you. And I'm like, is this how people think a date is supposed to go? Like, for me, like, I'll talk about myself a bit, but it's quickly going to become, okay, what do you think of this movie? What do you think of this? What's your philosophies?
Yep.
Will you read the Conan books and talk to me about
if somebody isn't giving you anything, there's a reason.
Yeah. And it's like, there's so much more to talk about than just people. And do I name a particular person?
If you're not sure, don't.
Okay. So
but if it's a real life person, but
okay, so there is an internet personality who we've talked about privately before, who makes Manosphere Types.
Right.
And he literally had a video where he's like, what would I ever talk to my sister about? What can a brother and sister talk about? How can they be close? Only thing I ever talk to with women is because, you know, I want to get in bed. And I'm like, oh, that tells me how shallow you are. Because
okay, I think it's pretty obvious who you're talking about now, so go ahead and name him.
Sorry. But it's so frustrating to me because I see these, and here's where we're really going to get back to the subject of strength, and particularly how this conversation came about.
Yeah, no, this is totally on topic, I think, because that's not right.
Yeah.
That need to posture is no different than what Jen does in when she's talking to freaking camera.
Yeah. And so we see these people who are like, oh, I'm an alpha male, and now it's sigma because, you know, alpha is overdone, and I guess everyone's a bunch of hipsters. It's like, oh, this guy's a beta, this guy's alpha.
I'm Sigma male thing, man. Because that's Dean on Supernatural. That's the Jensen Ackles character.
And so what we get is these people who they use it as an excuse to be a jerk. And one thing you pointed out on Twitter was the alpha male isn't the one who goes and picks fights.
Yep.
The alpha male is the one who is the leader and who is responsible for protecting the family.
Yep.
And I saw someone joke once, we say all these things of like, oh, you're an alpha male. When was the last time you fought off a Viking horde to protect your girlfriend?
Right.
Calm down.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I see so much of this, and I especially see it in romance novels. And like the Thor movie pulled off I hate to use the phrase alpha male, but it pulled off the alpha male love interest very well, because he's strong, he's powerful, but he's still polite, and you can still trust him and feel safe with him.
Right.
Whereas I try to read romance novels, and so often these writers will just create a man who's a jerk, and there's a reason why the romance novel readership has created the term alpha hole, because
what is it?
Alpha hole. It's basically asshole. It's basically he's an asshole disguised as an alpha.
That's so many male characters.
Yes.
To me, that's the problem I have with everybody jumps on me when I go here, but Tony Stark in the MCU. I think Robert Downey Jr. knew what he was doing with that character. I think he was the only one.
A few months ago, I rewatched the first and second Iron Man movies, and it was so weird to see his personality, because there's a few jokes and there's a few good one-liners, but it's nothing compared to what the whole MCU became after Whedon.
Tony Stark, he should have started off as an asshole. That's right. He's an arms dealer, for God's sakes, right? Getting into the alcoholism without doing a whole arc on it. Great, fine. But there were so many in those later, as late as Infinity War. There were so many scenes where I'm like, Tony, will you shut the fuck up? And I swear they sometimes put in Bruce Banner just so I could watch his face, because Ruffalo is me in those scenes. He's just like, there he goes again. Yeah, not gonna bother correcting him there. I'm just like, shut up, please. Let someone else have a turn that isn't strength, that's making an ass of yourself. And it's amazing to me how many people love the guy for that. And I'm a big fan of it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt.
Yeah.
And it's an issue in the MCU. They didn't do it with Captain America, but the time jump, him getting unfrozen, was disappointing to me, because I was hoping there'd be more nuance to that, because obviously what was considered acceptable male behavior and phrasings in World War II is not present day, right? And all we got is the one I understood that reference, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
But the way the characters reset, and we should make it clear for the audience, Song has not seen Thor Love and Thunder. I want her to see Thor Love and Thunder, because there's so many things where I have no idea how you're going to react, because Taika Waititi plays with the whole concept of that, gentleman warrior and alpha male, and what happened to Thor and Jane. Right. And he does this interesting thing about a problem he can't solve by hitting something, a series of problems he can't solve by hitting something. And as goofy as the movie is, and as much as they clearly have to keep, as we talk about all the time, Chris Hemsworth happy with dumb comedy, there's more of that examination, but it is still a reset. Like, he's back to being a butthead. And why do you think modern audiences love those butt heads because they're freaking everywhere, right? I mean, we talked about Iron Man not shutting up. There's what's his name? Red Guardian in the Black Widow movie that I couldn't stand, and everybody seemed to love him. And it's the same actor who plays Hopper on Stranger Things. So the fact that I was just so done said so much. But I am repelled by these assholes who always have to have the last word. But it seems action movie audiences love these guys. What am I missing, if anything?
I don't get it.
Okay.
Because, like, for me, the appeal of Thor is he has those old world manners.
Yeah. Well,
He
Captain
kisses
America
Jane
the same
hand.
way. Yeah. Yeah. Captain America's the same way, right? I mean, I like that. Even the one that they really stepped up on that I loved was Clint Barton and the family angle.
I remember when Age of Ultron came out, and I was like, "Oh, I love this." I've named it the Hawk's Nest, just because
well, have you seen Hawkeye?
I have.
Yeah, I love the fact that the family is an integral part of his story.
Yes, and I thought it was great. I loved the whole aspect of the Barton family.
Yeah.
And people complained about it, and I'm like, Barton has something to fight for, and that's something a lot of those heroes don't.
Well, and I like the fact his marriage was a partnership too, right? It wasn't I have to protect my loved ones, so I have to keep secrets from him. No, his wife knew everything he was doing at every moment. She was, kind of an oracle thing. And then you find out she was a shield agent.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, where else would he meet anyone? That's been his life, right? And to me, that's a strong guy because he tried to keep Kate out of danger, but when it became evident she wasn't going to listen, he went with it. He was flexible enough, but still, and the fact that he doesn't have superpowers and the fact that he did, lose his hearing from all those explosions, that to me made him stronger in terms of character than characters that really can't be hurt by much. Right. And I mean, that's the achievement with, have you seen the Superman and Lois show?
I have not.
That's the achievement with the Tyler, I always get his last name, Hotchler, Superman. So. He's got this great line because the big challenge with Superman is Superman's a lawful good character. He plays by the rules. He obeys the law. He's a Kansas farm boy. But giving him the two sons, I was afraid that was going to be incredibly obnoxious. But there are moments in the show where one of the sons turns their back because they're mad at dad again. Right? They show Clark Kent flailing to be a parent, but Clark Kent just looks at this guy and flails like this moment of complete frustration, like silent scream, and then he's right back to understanding, chill, cool guy dad, right? But that moment of, oh my god, I'm gonna kill this kid, that to me makes it show that it's hard, right? They found a way to get Superman to struggle. And when and this is, the whole idea of OP and God modding characters and that being a problem. That's why and that's the challenge with a character like Thor or the Hulk or Superman or any of these characters with, preternatural strength, unbreakable skin, all that stuff. It really is hard to give them interesting human challenges that are relatable because the characters are never designed to be relatable.
Yeah.
And they've had to sort of, how do I put this? They've had to sort of retcon certain things about the relatability of those characters, and it works better. It works better sometimes than others. And I think that's why this She-Hulk character has been driving people up the wall. And I love that the show predicted the outrage.
Yeah, I'd seen jokes about, so I just watched the series yesterday, finally. And so I'd seen you talking about the Twitter armor for a week joke. And I didn't know the context.
Yeah.
And then when it was, okay, so we've got Wong, it's like giving it Twitter armor for a week. And I'm like, okay, that's funny.
Yeah. Well, because they knew in order to get people to shut up, they had to throw a likable pre-existing male character at the audience. And people are going to freak on me for this. Guys, chill. Just, they predicted what was going to happen. And this is where people start going, they baited, they intentionally inflamed. And I've been in writers' rooms where we have to solve the problem of people are going to freak if we do this. It's right for the character. How do we handle it? And I just think it's interesting that the thing that people say is that we want content that tells its story and doesn't cave to pressure and stands up to the outrage machine. And somebody actually did it and they freaked out.
Well, it's like, people complain about the Marvel formula of the MCU, which is valid. A lot of the movies have become very formulaic, but then they actually break it and they give us something like WandaVision, or they give us something like She-Hulk.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's awful. And it's like,
well, see,
you guys got to pick a lane.
WandaVision was popular for all the wrong reasons, I think. I really appreciate them, like you said, trying to do something different. But to me, I'm totally on Team Agatha in WandaVision.
It was kind of funny because I remember I watched WandaVision and I loved it personally. But like, I'm also aware of the flaws in the characters and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I thought Paul Bettany was wonderful in it. I just wish there had been more of them.
I agree.
Yeah.
So we watched that, and it actually got me more excited for Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And then I saw Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I'm like, oh,
you didn't like it?
It wasn't bad. It just, so what I realized was one day, I think about halfway through the series, the episode ended and it pulled up WandaVision as the suggested next. Okay. And I saw that one of the genres for WandaVision is romance. And I'm like, oh, that's why it worked so much better for me.
Come on, you're not shipping Sam and Bucky? Come on, Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes are the unrequited romance of the MCU.
I admit romance has never really done anything for me.
Me either, but oh my God, I was so feeling Buck in that show.
I was there for Bucky. Sam's
clueless. But Sam, that's what I like about what they did with that, is Sam obviously cannot be Captain America the same way Steve Rogers was, because of time period and because he's a Black American. There are realities there, but he has the same goodness to him.
I have no problem with him as Captain America. He's just not a character that works for me personally. Like, I like him, he's just not one of my favorites, because honestly, the 3 W's, wizards, whatever joke, I'm just like, okay, that's...
See, I love him because he's a grief counselor.
See, I like that part.
Yeah, I really like Sam. Sam's a guy I could sit down and have a cup of coffee with.
I can see that. Yeah. So it's like, obviously between the two, I'm gonna pick Bucky, because Bucky has the more, he's a bit more brooding.
Well, he's another one, though. The MCU has been shit to Bucky Barnes.
Yeah.
There's another guy who I think is, and we're getting a Thunderbolts movie, so Winter Soldier has always been sort of central to that IP, so they are working on redeeming him. But and this is good because this is something I wanted to bring up, the idea of redemption through torture, that the MCU is, they're trying to rehabilitate these characters that someone other fucked up in an ensemble film.
Yeah.
And I think they overdid it with Bucky, right? heroes have killed more people in the MCU and felt less bad about it than Bucky does. And I think in part it's because Bucky had to do it against his will.
And that's the thing. It's like everyone holds him accountable. And there's like, it's one thing for the general populace to hold him accountable for stuff because they don't understand the nuance of the situation. But it's like, at some point, brainwashing. It's one thing for Bucky to feel guilty. It's another thing for people to treat him the way they do. And like,
this is when I start ranting, right? Because Wanda, we're supposed to feel bad for because Mind Stone. But then we get 10 episodes of Bucky suffering. It's an entire episode where it's 20 minutes of Loki getting kicked in the nuts again and again and again by Sif as a joke. And he was also under the influence of the Mind Stone, right? Why, and this is relevant to a discussion of strength, why is it treated so differently when it's a male character versus a female character? You know, I cannot stand that men must be punished, women must be pitied thing when they do something bad. Because Wanda knows what she's doing. She's making choices, right? And Wanda's another example of a character who has a ton of power, but she doesn't have internal strength. And I seem to be in the minority of thinking that Wanda doesn't have strong character.
She really doesn't. And it's understandable because you look at everything she's been through and losing Vision, and especially, you know, seeing him and then getting blipped and coming back and being told she can't do anything to honor him. So one thing I liked about Age of Ultron was the way, and we saw it also in Civil War, was the way Hawkeye took Wanda under his wing.
Yeah.
And he was looking after her. He came for her in Civil War and said, I'm getting you out of this house. And so that was what really frustrated me after Endgame. We get to WandaVision and I'm like, where's Clint? Like, it's bad enough. Like, I understand a lot happened in Endgame. But that's the thing. I'm like, how was she allowed? Why did she fall through the cracks the way she did?
About Wanda and Vision is because they get together off screen initially. And we don't understand what the bond is there. And so all of WandaVision felt to me like she was just using him as a puppet. It didn't feel like a love story to me. It felt like abuse.
It also feels like a fantasy because, like, here's this one fairly attractive guy who was nice to her.
Is that what you read in? Because I'm like, how does a woman fall for a synthoid?
See,
how does that happen?
That's something I've never really understood. Like, I see these stories where like there's an android or whatever character and it's like, oh, we want her to, fans are like, we want her to find love, and I'm like, she's not real.
Well, that's what I loved about Westworld, is they actually showed the story of Dolores and William, and it's the reason my interpretation is the fact that William is so full of self-loathing that he fell in love with a machine is part of the reason he becomes the Man in Black.
Yeah, and I hadn't even really thought about it with Wanda until I was saying it, that it's like, oh, here's this man who's nice to her.
Yeah.
And we see how women who are neglected, people who are neglected, someone shows them a moment of niceness and it's like, oh, this must be love. Because this is,
I'll go one deeper with that. Is he safe because she doesn't see him as a real man?
I think that's a very valid question.
Right? Because I'm seeing this in the MCU a lot, right? The men who aren't Thor or Captain America, all of the second fiddles, and Wong breaks this, and that's how I'm like, Wongers! You know, I'm so excited about Wong. Because, I mean, look at it. Bucky definitely is bi or pansexual coded, right? And he's getting his ass kicked by the Dora Milaje. And you know, he's clearly not, like, it's sort of that second fiddle deal again. And we all love him, but he's treated like shit.
Yeah.
You know, Loki in his own show gets freaking, I mean, Sylvie, you know how I feel about Sylvie, can't stand Sylvie, thinks Sylvie's abusive. In my mind, Sylvie is a lesbian. I ship her with Valkyrie. Put those two together, it works better, right? Because she never shows a shred of actual interest in him unless she can use him to achieve her goals, which is fine, but it's not a romance, right? It's a symbol of, and I think the only reason he falls for her, because I'm like, again, why? What is the interest here? Right. And it's because he thinks the only person who will ever give him a chance is another version of himself. But Lokis are so full of self-loathing that they can't even love another version of them. Probably the last person in the world who would. But, you know, Loki, sometimes I wonder if Odin wouldn't have been kinder to just leave that poor little Jotun baby to die. Right. Because
can I just say that's something that's so frustrating for me, is in the first Thor movie, Odin genuinely seems like a good king. He seems like a man who's made mistakes.
But he's a shitty father. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a really shitty father.
He's learned and he's trying to do his best now. And then, of course, we got to Dark World and all that's gone. And Odin has just gotten worse ever since until suddenly he dies. And
at the end, the fact that Loki does everything he does in the first movie trying to be a proper Asgardian man. He is, both Thor and Loki are trying to earn their father's approval.
Mm-hmm.
Thor has a chance. Loki doesn't. Because, of course, why does Loki let go and fall off the broken Bifrost? Because he's looking for Odin's approval and Odin says no. And that is why, how can anybody have a moral compass when every aspect of masculinity they're treated to value is something out of reach? You know, even the fact that the MCU labels him gender fluid, unless he actually sees himself as not a he, that's wrong. Just because there are female versions of him in other timelines, like, the universe invalidates that character's masculinity. And the first movie is so him struggling to be a proper man that strikes me as false.
And because he also introduces himself as a son of Asgard.
Right, which I always found weird. I always found weird because they're all over the place. He's a god of mischief. He's a god of chaos. He's a Laufeyson. He's an Odinson. Like you said, like, that naming convention matters. Why? I think he takes on Laufeyson as a fuck you to Odin, because, again, he can never make the asshole happy.
Okay, here's the thing. The only time I've ever seen him refer to himself as Laufeyson was in the Dark World, specifically as he's handing Thor over to Malekith.
That's right.
So I always thought that was just him going, see, I'm not one of them. So I always thought that was a deception. I never thought he was claiming that identity. He was just using it for the moment.
I agree, which is why I think it's strange that the MCU actually refers, and yes, that is the character's name in the comics, but, you know, he's an example of Joss Whedon could have done a much better job with him in Avengers by showing that when someone is not given the opportunity to have a self-concept of strength, they just become a bully. And that, I mean, Whedon can't connect to that because that's his problem. Right? And I do think that is something that is, I think that could be a very significant story, which is what I thought the Loki show was going to be, and it ended up not being, and so all the disappoint, right? Because,
well, it's interesting because, you've talked about how your frustration with the female-led MCU stories is so, most of the time, until we got to She-Hulk, basically, the whole story is, who am I?
Yeah, and Ms. Marvel actually broke that too, because she pretty much,
that's true.
She knew who she was. It was discovering her family's history, which I guess is another take on who am I, but
true, but it's different and it felt better.
Yeah.
if any character needs a who am I story, it's Loki.
Yeah,
And
because
the MCU needs it because they can't figure out who he is.
Yeah,
that's why he's different with every writer and every movie.
See him saying he pulls the Iago, right? I am a villain. That's a and Hiddleston is playing him as Iago from the first movie. Like, if you've ever seen any film version of Othello, he is absolutely pulling from that character. And so
here's the thing. So one thing I think I tweeted about this once was, just because you say your character does something,
precisely,
if you don't actually show it, it doesn't mean they did it. And in this specific case I was referring to, I think it was a character who was like, oh, he had done this great thing. He'd like bridged a gap or helped fix something. And I'm like, that is not what I'm getting from this character.
Yeah.
That is not how you're writing this.
Yeah.
Just because you tell me he did it doesn't mean he did. Same thing with Loki. Can say he's a villain, but if they're not actually going to write him like it, he's not.
But they keep labeling him a narcissist as well. And I want them to stop, because you cannot sell me a romance featuring a couple of narcissists. That's not love.
No.
And I want them to, because I disagree that he's a narcissist, because if he was truly driven by narcissism, he would have gone, fuck you. You know, he would have been actively constantly trying to fuck over Thanos instead of just.
Loki is a lonely, broken little boy.
Agreed. That is my read on him too.
We can also see it in the first movie. I got the impression that he was infatuated with Sif. And part of why he resented Thor was because Sif was so clearly in love with Thor.
Okay, but this is my Snape theory as well, because in the comics, Lady Loki is based on Sif. So is Loki in love with Sif, or does he want to brush her hair? Right? I mean,
it's interesting because was it in the comics or the original myths? I think it was in the comics. He cut her hair.
They use that in the D+ show. That's a Norse myth. Yeah. That's why she kicks him in the balls again and again and again, because he cut her hair.
Because she's actually supposed to be Heimdall's sister.
Yes.
And so she was like Heimdall. She was one of the fairest of them all.
Yeah.
And so she had golden blonde hair until Loki cut it. And then they got the dwarves to craft her the black hair.
Right.
Not quite sure how that works, but okay.
Yeah, it's Norse myth explaining why some of these Norsemen have black hair. But yeah, they really are messing up. And I do think, because we're dealing with fanboys, I really think part of the reason Loki became so popular with male viewers is he's one of the few characters that they can see themselves in. I think Sebastian Stan's take on Bucky Barnes is similar, right? They're the sidekick. And
here's the thing, I don't know that I've ever seen a lot of male Loki fans.
Oh, there are so many
fangirls.
The fangirls are scary. Not gonna lie. The female cosplayers are hot as shit, but they're scary. But no, there are a lot of guys who really like him, and I do think it's because he can't win. And it's the same reason guys like the Joker, right? He's the skinny guy that Batman beats up. And I do think that they could say something interesting. And I think it's no accident that it's the female creative team on She-Hulk that recognizes the audience loves these quote unquote alpha male characters. And the fact that Wong is becoming the new Coulson of the MCU, I love because of that. I mean,
can I just say, because again, I just watched it last night.
Yeah.
The Sopranos theme in a Disney Plus show was one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had.
You know what my read on that was? Because the show is so freaking old, right?
Yeah.
That and this is what I like about when this is a good something happened off screen and we have to work for it for a bit. To me, one, okay, he's just getting more into modernity because God, was he raised in that temple? I don't know. But he's
from Nepal.
Yeah. But he is, what is it? Camertage, they call it? Yeah. But because you can't use Nepal in any movie internationally released because China will get mad. But it was that in the
straight
comics
up say Nepal in She-Hulk.
In She-Hulk, yeah, but that's the
Not a
difference
movie.
between streaming and theatrical release. They don't have to worry about China on Disney Plus. But the fact that he is so busy cleaning up after Doctor Strange's messes that he is that behind on his telly. I love that character point.
Well, it's like, I think I even, because I think I messaged you about like the whole hearing the Sopranos theme thing. And because I just watched that show for the first time in 2020. And so it's like I heard the song and I'm like, I know that. Oh my God.
Yeah.
But and so then part of my message to you was, look, Wong, if even I've seen it, you are way behind.
But that's what I love that, because this is a busy guy. Right.
Yeah.
And he's just, he's singing karaoke with Shang-Chi and Katie, and he's watching The Sopranos, and he's what I want to see from these sidekick characters in the MCU. They have lives because they're real people. They're not icons. And when we get those little human moments from them, because one of my minor quibbles about Multiverse of Madness was Wong has been training his whole life. Yeah. Right. And for some odd reason, he can't do as much magic as Doctor Strange can. He has that little whip and he does the circles, but you don't see much from him. Yeah. And I treated it as, okay, he's not willing to pay the price for the more hardcore spells. Fine. But still, I love that they're doing more with him, Yeah. And the fact that he is a good guy in an impossible circumstance. He's the guy that comes in after two white people totally shit the bed and has to clean up the mess. Right? Because why that order was being run by an ancient Welsh person, I get that was the old guard. How do you want to fail on this character? Because again, that character was originally Tibetan, and you could not do that in a theatrical release film. And I love Tilda Swinton.
Okay, don't take this the wrong way. Tilda Swinton has a face that looks very ethereal.
Yes.
And like not quite human.
Right. That's why I thought she worked. That's why she works so well in the part she plays. One. Well, and the witch in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yes.
She was perfectly cast in that physically. Well, I mean, she's a great actress, so she can pull it off. But yeah, I tend to get more interested in these characters. And even with Jen, I think that the most human moment and the moment you're kind of like, okay, she's not just bluster, was that scene with the too good to be true guy and that rejection of her as herself. And to me, that really spoke to every woman's fear the first time there's a sleepover, right? Because you got to wash your face. You don't have the makeup. You don't have the full face. You don't have the hair.
Yeah.
That's what you're afraid of.
Yeah. And I could kind of see his point and like where he was coming from. And like, I get the difference because it's like, it's She-Hulk. She scooped him up. There is the bit of, oh, he wants, kind of someone who can dominate him.
But that's fetish. That's not a relationship.
Yeah. So it's like, I could get, okay, he clearly had this fetish. Like, he swiped on She-Hulk.
Well, it's funny because when he left after that, my first instinct, and apologize to anybody who is offended by that, is, oh my God, he's a chaser.
Yeah.
He's like, it was so coded that way of he's not actually interested in her. It's the ego. There's a narcissist, right? And that's what I thought was really good about, what's her name? Jen Gao, the writer on it, that
I
she
believe
showed
so, yeah.
that the charming guy on the first date is probably a narcissist because he's not invested enough to actually take risks and mess up and stumble. He's too polished. He's just in it for the sex.
there's the line from the musical Into the Woods where Cinderella's prince says, I was raised to be charming, not sincere.
That's right. That's right.
Which I don't usually like deconstruction stories, especially with fairy tales. It's like, please give me my happy ending. Give me my love story. But it's like that line was something that really struck me.
Well, it's Sondheim, right? I mean, he's that
Yeah.
whole musical is deconstruction. The whole thing is deconstruction, but it works. Yeah. It works. I mean, Wicked was deconstruction too, as a musical.
True, Wicked is different, but Wicked still gets a bit of a happy ending. So
I guess. I mean, yeah,
she got the boy.
Yeah,
she got the boy.
Yeah, and I mean that's my favorite song in Wicked. It's not Defying Gravity. It's
I'm not that girl.
I'm not that girl. Yeah, that's one of the few musical numbers sung by a woman in a musical that I completely relate to. And I mean that's Jen, right? And I'm glad that, because let's face it, Disney is sort of leaning into the nerd girl. Jen is almost, Mirabelle who turns into Louisa from Encanto.
Oh my God, you're right.
She pretty much is. I mean, Mirabelle is outwardly nicer, but that's because she's younger and life hasn't kicked her around.
Yeah.
She's trying to be Isabella, but she's Mirabelle. She's a nerd. She went to law school. She's in her pajamas at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night. She's not cool.
Which honestly, like, I'm usually in my pajamas by 7.
My favorite days are the days that I don't have to put on non-pajama pants.
Well, yes. But it's like, I come home from work. I don't get clubbing. I'll admit the whole dating sequence in the most recent episode, I'm like, this is one of the most depressing things I've ever seen.
It was supposed to be, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the dating in your 30s line, I was like, oh, you ruined it for me, because I hate that trope.
Yeah.
There's no shame in dating in your 30s. Dating can be fun, but that was a character point, right? For her, it's shameful.
I mean, speaking as someone who is single in my 30s, that line hit me.
Yeah. It's a thing.
Yeah, because it's most of the mature, responsible men at this point have probably settled down with mature, responsible women.
The weird thing is, that is not true. I mean, he's right there. The guy that showed her the best poop bathroom. He's right there. Dude is right. I mean, let's face it. The most mature, responsible man in the MCU is Jen's cousin. She's got a problem there. But I mean, and I love what they've done with Banner on the subject of strength, because of the fact that a lot of people don't understand about Bruce Banner. It's not about controlling his anger. He is not allowed to feel anger. And that, can you imagine what that's like?
No.
Yeah, like, dude.
There was a young adult book once. I forget what it was called, but the whole fantasy plot, it was an urban fantasy, but the whole thing is this girl could never cry, because if she did, she would flood the world.
Yeah.
And eventually she did. But I'm like, this is so stupid. Especially at one point where, like, she's being mocked because her friends have never seen her cry.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, I've seen all of them cry, and I'm like, I don't buy this. This is so stupid. Like,
I'd actually like to read that book to see how they handle it, because
I think it's called Delirium. Let me see if I can find it. I might be able to, and I'll let you know. I only read the first one.
that was the thing that drove me crazy about was it Infinity War, when Tony takes shots at Bruce.
Yeah.
And every time he does it, I'm like, Tony, you're an idiot. You're provoking the guy who can't get mad. You're a jerk. Cut it the fuck out.
It's also weird because, like, there's supposed to be friends.
But Tony Stark actually is a narcissist, and that's why I had trouble lionizing him. Because I mean, I was waiting for Cap at some point to go, Tony, don't piss him off. I piss everybody off. Don't piss him off. Tony, you're supposed to be a genius. I was waiting for that line and it never came. And this is the fundamental problem with superhero stories regarding strength. And I'm going to say something really, really contentious here, but hear me out. Superhero stories tend to be written by weak men.
Yes.
So they don't understand strength. And so what they end up telling is stories of aggression. And that's a big problem with comic book storytelling. Which
that
is why... Go ahead, sorry.
Or we get issues upon issues of people brooding.
Well, that's the same thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, how after the Bat and Cat wedding didn't happen, which is such a dick move on DC's part.
You saw it coming, though.
True, but it's like they had hyped it up. They had comic book shops buying at a time when comic book shops were already struggling so much to hype them up and say, hey, here's the party pack. And then we all knew it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
That to me was just, ugh.
Well, they pulled the same shit with Green Arrow and Black Canary the first time around too.
True. And Marvel did the same thing about the same time with Kitty and Colossus.
That's right.
And Rogue and Gambit ended up taking their wedding, which on one hand, I'm like, I finally got the Rogue and Gambit wedding.
No shit.
Okay, I'll take it. But I was still like, okay, but they had to take someone else's wedding. They deserve so much better. I'm a Rogue Gambit fan.
So, well, I love Gambit. I love Gambit, and we're starting to get a bit of noise, so I'm gonna watch that. We may have to dump out, and restart this. But yeah, see, Gambit's the exception to me because I cannot stand those allegedly charming, rogue, womanizing, basically Star-Lord, everything that's wrong with Star-Lord.
I hate that type.
Yeah, but Gambit is the exception because he does reform.
Now, what's interesting is I have a friend who's a huge Gambit fan as well, and she said it seemed like a lot of the times when he claimed he was going out on especially in the old comics, like he'd claim he was going out on a date, he's gonna hook up with a woman. It turned out he was really just pulling a thieving job that he didn't want the X-Men to know about.
Yeah.
And he just didn't want any shit for it.
That's right.
So it's like, okay, how much actual womanizing was there?
They show in his past, they sort of used sex as currency.
Yeah.
In the I always forget the Guild of Thieves.
Yeah.
For the record, that's where I want MCU to start the X-Men. With that, start with Guild of Thieves.
Oh my god! Oh,
see,
imagine if it started with some lead-in, and then Rogue and Gambit and Remy and Belladonna's wedding.
Right.
Go full mob movie.
Yeah, and that cool Louisiana thing. And you can shoot in Louisiana, which brings money in there. But yeah, start there because that's like the one area of X-Men comics that has not been done. And so there's space. I mean, Gambit was sort of a footnote in the X-Men movies. So there's space to start there. And then you can show his life before Rogue. And then Rogue can come in and we can get rid of Carol Danvers.
Yes, please.
Because Carol Danvers has a purpose.
And it's not leading the Avengers.
No, it's not.
Going into a coma.
Yeah, and wow, there is an example of they really fucked up portraying a strong character.
Oh, God.
Right? I mean, to me, Jen Walters, Kamala Khan is way stronger in her own way than Carol was, because, you know, bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's being afraid and doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, they could have done so much more with that character, and it seems like they're trying to, but their attempts to give her a personality I find sort of obnoxious.
I think it's too late, because I don't intend to give her another chance.
But
like,
again,
I'll see the Marvels just for Kamala.
And what's her name? Monica
Rambeau, yeah.
Yeah, I like her. But see, there's an example of they're trying to make Carol quirky, whereas if it was a guy who had to come back that far, every single guy, even Doctor Strange, gets a comeuppance.
Can I just say, I'm so tired of quirky.
Yeah. But then again, Kamala Khan, quirky, it works.
Quirky, it works because she's a child.
Yeah, she's a teenager.
You get an adult woman who's like, oh, I'm so quirky. I'm like, please grow up.
Well, MJ's kind of quirky, but she's quirky in kind of a I hate the world way.
Well, yes, but I don't really like MCU MJ. And
really,
I like her as a character. I don't like her as MJ.
Well, she's not Mary Jane though.
Well, true, but they still took the name, and I'm very emotionally attached to Mary Jane because of her background is very, very similar to my own childhood and everything she went through. So I'm a bit like, can't you give me this on screen?
I like the fact that they actually called her Marie Jones instead of Mary Jane as a respect to the fact that they're not going in that direction, and so they shouldn't call her that.
I think it's just, you know, it's the one movie adaptation I've had of my favorite comic book character, period, has been Kirsten Dunst, Mary Jane. And can we all acknowledge that was terrible?
I don't acknowledge those movies. My most enjoyable Tobey Maguire Spider-Man moments were in Spider-Man No Way Home.
And, you know, it's weird because, like, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies were the ones that got me into comics in the first place.
Oh, really?
Yes.
See, Spider-Man comics got me into comics.
Well, that wasn't an option for me, really, unfortunately. So, but I saw the movies and I'm like, oh, I need more of this. And I started learning about the comics and reading Ultimate Spider-Man in particular. And even Ultimate Spider-Man didn't do Mary Jane properly.
No, they mucked with MJ. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the thing, and this really frustrated me with the Tobey Maguire movies. Although I will say, when I saw No Way Home, I did not expect to get emotional.
Seeing so Tobey emotional.
Maguire. It was bizarre.
It was Andrew Garfield, the Andrew Garfield moment that killed me.
Yeah, for me,
gut punch.
Yeah, it's so, the thing about it kind of, we saw it in both the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, is Mary Jane's abusive father was reduced to basically being white trailer trash. In the comics, her father is an English professor.
Mm-hmm.
And I always found that a bit more interesting, in that it's an intelligent man who holds a place in society and who is a teacher in a college.
But the movies always nerf abuse storylines.
True.
Right? They nerfed Ant-Man and the Wasp. They just avoided it completely with Tony Stark's alcoholism, because in the books, when he's in the depths of alcoholism, he's awful to Pepper.
Yeah.
And they just sort of gloss that all over. He's still kind of a dick, but I found myself in Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't care.
Well, you know, I remember a point in the Civil War comics where Tony comes to see Steve's body after he's been killed. And he's making his confession, basically. And he says, you know, through all this, I never took one drink. Mm-hmm. And it's like, we never got that moment with MCU Tony. We never got that. And obviously the alcoholism wasn't as big in the movie as it was
casting Robert Downey Jr. was the shorthand for that.
Yes. So I still would have liked to have seen that moment. Unfortunately, in movies nowadays, there is this thing of everyone is drinking strong liquor like water. Like I saw a breakdown once of how much Cersei drank in Game of Thrones. And it basically came down to she should not be able to see straight, let alone walk straight.
I thought Lena Headey played her sort of sauced most of the time.
I saw that, but it's like the amount she was always drinking, and she drank more than Tyrion.
If I were her, I'd drink.
Like I don't blame it at all, but it's like we also see it in all these shows like Sex and the City and even Gilmore Girls, where it's like, oh, I've got to have my wine. I've got to have
wine mom thing.
And it's the same with like we see these shows aimed at women where the women are always eating and they're always having pie or cake or these really sugary coffees, and they never talk about dieting. They never talk about working out. And it's like then women try to act what they see on TV, and it's like you can't do that. That's not healthy.
That's right. Yeah.
It's a fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, I always see drinking like, my boy Logan. That's a symbol of his self-destructiveness.
Yes.
Right. I think he'd love it if he could actually slowly kill himself that way, and he can't. And that's the big tragedy of it.
We saw that a bit in Captain America, the First Avenger, where it's like the one time we see, well, obviously there was what was it, schnapps or something?
Mm-hmm.
Doctor almost gave him, but then it's, I can't get drunk.
Right.
After Bucky dies.
Right.
I can't get drunk. And it's like, then we get to the Hulks where it's like, oh, look, we could just drink all the, well, so, okay, you're just getting buzzed. I mean, I don't drink. I guess the buzz is pleasant, but I'm like, that just seems like, can't you find other ways to have fun?
See, it's interesting because for me, I love my scotches and everything like that. It's not the getting drunk, because I can relate to, I don't have the receptors. Mm-hmm. So opioid, like pain medications don't work. A buddy of mine, when he heard what I went through with my knee surgery, was like, what are you, fucking Wolverine? Because it was 3 shots of morphine and nothing. It's the strong taste. It's almost like a focus. It brings you present. So when you're dealing with difficult stuff, that burn, I think it's the same reason I like spicy food. Like that tang, that burn, that's what does it for me. And I wish some people had, because scotch is very much a character point, right? The fact that Jen drinks scotch, I like. It's not wine, it's scotch. She's not bullshitting with the wine mom nonsense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do kind of like how they're shaping up with She-Hulk. And if the best story about strength ends up being She-Hulk in the MCU, I'm gonna really laugh. Because I mean, everything down from she doesn't pick her name, and then she gets sued for a name she didn't pick. And I think it's interesting how they're teasing Titania almost like a Moriarty type figure.
Interesting.
Yeah, she's kind of always sort of there in the background, right?
Yeah.
But there hasn't been the immediate conflict. And that to me is actually good writing, because the minute they go head to head, then it becomes this plot vortex, right? Where if they're not directly fighting, people like, can we get back to the Titania fight? And people are complaining about the absence of Titania, but she's there. You always see her in the news stories and, the lawsuit, and they're doing stuff on social media. She is kind of swirling in the background. And I enjoy that, because that's an old school supervillain.
Yeah. I'm curious to see where they go with that. And honestly, the superpowered social media influencer. I mean, obviously, my first thought was, are we getting to mutants already? How does she have superpowers?
Well, she might be a mutant. I mean, they have introduced that, right? But I think it interesting social media influencer as villain foil is
that to me was an interesting road to take, because honestly, and I think we've seen it a bit in the comics, like you have superpowers, you go on social media, that's totally realistic to me.
Well, it also, what is the ultimate feminine superpower? It's popularity.
Yeah.
They deal with that on The Boys as well. Like Starlight's real power. Okay, yeah, sure. She can go blinky lights, right? But her real power is just, what did they give her? Like 90 million Instagram followers or something like that. That is actually her greatest power, is just she has this meticulously crafted bullshit public image that gives her the ability to fuck over Homelander, at least temporarily. And there does, this thing about women and popularity and that being strength. I like that people are going there now, because obviously, the male trope of the Ronin, the loner, he jumps from town to town, the cowboy. Public regard is not as important for power dynamics and strength in male characters as female characters. Female characters have to be strong and likable. And that's hard.
Yeah.
Because every time you project force, someone is going to disagree with what you're doing.
Yeah. And that does come down to, I'm going to go back to Jane Austen's Emma for a second, because you just reminded me. There's the scene where Emma and Mr. Knightley are reunited with their siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And it specifically talks about how the brothers greeted each other in that proper English way, reserved, not quite showing how truly happy they were to see each other again. Because that wasn't allowed. Because men weren't allowed to be emotional like that.
Yeah.
Whereas Emma is allowed to fawn over her sister and gossip and be absolutely delighted. And it's a totally different standard. And we have this thing for the strong male loner. It's the John Wayne. It's I'm trying to think of who, the Ronin.
Yeah.
And just these ideas of these, Logan even.
Yeah. Logan's very much that type.
They're on their own. But I mean, Logan is at his best when he's looking after a young girl.
Right.
There's a reason why Logan is the best of all the Fox X-Men movies.
Well, there's also a reason why they keep throwing teenagers at Doctor Strange and Iron Man to make them tolerable too.
Yes.
It just works because you see a softer side.
Yeah. And I mean, it is also a trend. It's like I said last time, the Mandalorian is mommy porn because they gave him a baby to humanize him.
That's right. But that goes back to the Western trope as well of saving the Native American baby.
Yeah. Or also that there's an old John Wayne movie, True Grit.
Yeah.
Which I only know of because they made a remake a while ago. And
what's his name? The Stallone, the Deliberate B movie Samaritan uses the same device. It's a 10-year-old boy or something like that, but it's still essentially softening the anti-hero with a kid.
Yeah. And there's a reason why the first X-Men movie they gave Wolverine Rogue.
Yeah, she was a combo of Rogue and Jubilee, because the relationship in the comics is Logan and Jubilee.
Yes.
So I thought that was weird. Why not just call her Jubilee?
I don't know. Well, I mean, their whole plot revolved around the power stealing and everything.
I guess, and I guess at the time the CGI wasn't quite there, so doing Jubilee's powers might have not been. But I was one of the few people who really liked Hugh Jackman in those X-Men movies. I despised those X-Men movies.
They're so bad. Hugh Jackman was like the best thing about them. And I loved the relationship between him and Rogue in the first one. And
he was great. Patrick Stewart, even though, they took wild liberties with Xavier's backstory, casting him, was good as Xavier. Everybody else I actually thought was a straight up miscast.
Agreed.
I mean, okay, it wasn't Rebecca Romijn's fault they made Mystique mute, but they haven't done a good Magneto yet.
Did they make her mute?
Yeah, she didn't speak. Both
She
her
does.
and Deathstrike are mute in the X-Men movies. Pissed me off.
No, she does have a few lines.
A few lines, yeah, but she barely speaks, and
not
that's
enough.
not Mystique. That's not Mystique in the comics. She's Machiavellian.
Yeah. I mean, she's the one who's leading the Brotherhood of Mutants.
That's right. And her and Magneto, she's not. One of the weirdest moments was when they had that weird flirtation between Magneto and Mystique in that helicarrier. I'm like, you don't cast Ian McKellen as Magneto and have him flirt with girls.
Yeah, no, that was weird.
Though I did like him better as Magneto than Fassbender.
He did a fantastic job for the character. It just doesn't quite work with the story.
Well, yeah, I mean,
with the character.
To me, Magneto hasn't been done. There's an opportunity with Magneto to actually do him properly.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's an obvious way of bringing in a completely different Magneto through Wanda.
Yeah.
And you can explain why he's totally different, because completely it's not separated from MCU canon anymore. I'm not quite sure why the Scarlet Witch ended up on the MCU side. I guess because she was an Avenger as well.
I guess that is a good question.
Yeah, like why was she exempt?
Yeah.
But weird. Yeah, X-Men, people love those movies, and people have said, look, it's up there with Spider-Man, even if you don't like them. They sort of ushered in this current wave, and I will take
I hate to say this. I will take the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies over the X-Men movies.
Oh, absolutely, if I had to pick.
Yeah.
I was actually really depressed by X-Men 2.
I can see that.
Just because it was another mute character. And that's why when people are screaming, they changed it now. Like you said, they keep changing MJ. They completely changed Deathstrike. They changed massive parts of Mystique. And they were just like, oh, well, she's hot, so I don't care. Kristen Dunst, there was some pushback to that.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't traditionally hot enough. And I don't like that. To me, the best Mary Jane adaptation is the Marvel Spider-Man PlayStation game.
Yes.
She's actually well done there. Very much the ultimate universe Mary Jane, but still at least a loyal representation of that.
The problem with the Tobey Maguire movies was they made MJ Gwen Stacy.
Yeah.
And then Gwen Stacy comes in and she's a model.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay. So I don't like Gwen Stacy in the comics.
To me, Gwen Stacy is the character they bring in when they've run out of ideas for Peter and MJ, because again, comic book writers don't tend to be great at healthy relationships.
Yeah.
And so they don't know how to keep the stories between a committed monogamous couple interesting, other than constantly throwing temptation at Peter.
Yeah, and I totally. So I've at least heard that when they made him do One More Day, J. Michael Straczynski, who had just done a fantastic, one of the best runs on Amazing Spider-Man ever, in my opinion. And then Joe Quesada was like, hey, we need you to split them up. And he was like, I had just spent 5 years getting them back together.
Yep.
And I've heard he actually wanted them to take his name off One More Day because he didn't actually want to be affiliated.
I don't blame him.
It was so bad. I don't want to be one of those fans who's like still hung up on One More Day, because I am. It's ridiculous. But I hate One More Day. And they haven't actually.
That's why I'm surprised how much I like No Way Home, because I delayed seeing it because it's basically one more day.
Yeah, even I saw the trailers and I'm like, okay, that's one more day. That's one more day. But you know what? This might be doing it right. And sure enough, they did it right.
Yeah.
And they've built up this trio of Peter, MJ, and Ned. They're not going to break it up for good. It's going to be back. It's not going to be, oh, we don't see MJ in the comics again for 5 more years.
Yeah,
however long it was.
They left the window open for hope, and they how do I put this? They ended it on the sense that they are meant to be together.
Yes.
And this is telling that story. And I mean, wow, do they nail the essence of Spider-Man in that movie, where he actually does suffer a lot of losses for his heroism.